doing?
Hey, sorry about that.
No worries. I guess I didn't have the latest version of Instagram. I didn't realize it.
Did you re-download it just now?
I just did. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah. No, I was sitting here waiting, and I'm like wondering why I couldn't get in. So I didn't realize I didn't have it. Well, thank you for your patience.
No worries at all. Thank you for everyone for joining. And how are you?
Great. Feeling good in Miami. Beautiful weather, and you know, it's interesting times here. You somehow are buffered a bit from all the madness. The government is very liberal, so I'm always wearing masks, but I feel to be the only one. I'm the
Oh. All right. So really good to see you here, and very honored to be doing this with
thank you for having me.
Yep. And so please allow me to introduce you before we jump into our questions. Today we're very honored to have Chad Oppenheim, founder of Oppenheim Architecture, joining us from Miami to discuss the relationship between architecture and land. And our title for today is Carving Out the Land. So from a young age, you discovered the power of a place to optimize how people live, play, or work in that particular environment. You founded Oppenheim Architecture in 1999 to design a new kind of sensory, site-specific architecture, working across scale, typology, and geography. Every Oppenheim project is a sensitive contextual response, guided by the philosophy that design follows life and form follows feeling. You are a graduate of Cornell University and a fellow of the AIA. You work closely with clients to realize and amplify their vision, backed by strong technical and project teams in both Miami and Basel. You have lectured widely and taught at various architecture schools, including Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, and most recently, Cornell University's College of Architecture, Art, and Planning. You have also published 2 books, Layer, Radical Homes and Hideouts of Movie Villains in 2019, which is an academic investigation into the cultural associations of modernist design with villainy in cinema. Ooh,
I just happened to have it on my desk. I didn't really.
You did not just have it there.
Yeah, I just happened to have it.
As well as Spirit of Place in that same year, which is the monograph about the practice featuring 7 award-winning projects. So, which leads me to my first question. A lot of your designs possess such effortlessness, yet powerful and poetic quality. What are some of the design principles that guide Oppenheim Architecture during the design, research, and making process?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction. I think that what we are really after is this kind of trying to find the truth, trying to uncover what a project wants to be, and we listen very carefully to the land. You know, the land where the project is going, and sometimes the land calls for or requires a building to kind of sit on it. Like if you're building in Miami, you know, everyone's trying to raise the land right now because we're dealing with resiliency and sea level rise. But in areas like in the deserts, in the Middle East, where we've been able to sort of play in the sand and use these very dramatic landscapes, we want to respect them and honor them, and kind of work within those landscapes to create a heightened sense of connection to the specific place. So, you know, the Desert Rock project, which was just released as a project we've been working on for 3+ years, and we essentially scoured the deserts outside of the Red Sea to locate where we would first want to do the project. We found this incredible massif, which is this incredible rock, and the rock kind of spoke to us and, you know, said, like, these are moments where you can inhabit it. And while it maybe looks effortless, it's a tremendous effort to accomplish it with an incredible team, not only in the office, but engineers, the best engineers from around the world, geologists, structural engineers, environmental engineers, and that effortless feeling really required this tremendous undertaking to accomplish. But the idea for us is to really reconsider the relationship that we have with nature. This idea of, we taught a studio at Cornell a couple of years ago, which is like this notion of coexist, and how can we sort of learn from ancient civilizations who didn't require the amount of technology and other things that we deal with. How can we learn from their knowledge over the millennia to help us realign and reconnect with the natural world, right? This is our home, our planet. I know Elon Musk wants to go off to Mars to find other opportunities for settlement, and while this project looks like it could be in Mars because of the desert rock and in fact, one of the projects we worked on in the area, they filmed The Martian. They didn't even change anything. They only changed the sky and special effects. But it's such an incredible planet that we need to kind of reconsider how we use resources, how we can really almost have a love with the land, and how we can kind of make the architecture disappear. For us, it's not about showing the architecture, but about how the architecture can recede and help show nature, help show the beauty of what we take for granted. So that's kind of an overall ideology.
That's a really great statement to start off this interview, because we have so many questions prepared for you, especially about desert rock. I think indeed good architecture often pushes us to find equilibrium between the nature and the man-made, and to achieve a symbiosis between those two is truly very inspiring. So how did your upbringing and early interaction with architecture and land affect your thinking and design?
Well, I grew up in central New Jersey, about an hour from Manhattan. And maybe it was, I never really thought about it, how my upbringing kind of affected it. But maybe it was when you drive from my house to New York City, which we would do on the weekends. It was kind of like our big Saturday plan. You would drive by, I would have to say is probably the most prime example of like what not to do with the planet. Refineries, smoke popping out. It was like such a dystopian vision. And it's, even though I grew up in the countryside, in suburbia with farms and, forests and things like that, in order to like get to Manhattan, so I guess you can go another way, which, well, no, it's pretty much the only way. But in order to get to Manhattan, like you had to go through the most hideous sort of assault on our planet. And maybe, I mean, I'm just drawing the conclusion now, but like maybe that had an effect on me subconsciously, is that like we want to kind of reconsider that notion. We want to sort of understand how we can be in more harmony with the planet, as opposed to like kind of forcing it to do what we want. How can we be more kind of passive and even though it takes a lot of thinking and ingenuity, but I believe that this is something that we've been preaching for many years, and we're now just finally getting the opportunities in the last couple of years to kind of like fulfill our dreams. But I remember I wanted to be an architect since I was 7, and my mother would buy me all these like Frank Lloyd Wright books. I don't think she really knew many other architects, like the European masters or whatever. So Frank Lloyd Wright, an American architect, and Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, spoke about this organic architecture and this idea of really kind of becoming one with a site. You know, one could think about falling water and you know, other projects where Frank Lloyd Wright kind of integrated architecture and land, and then of course the work of one of his disciples, who's you know, maybe even a bigger influence than Frank Lloyd Wright, is John Lautner, who created mostly predominantly homes, but the homes, they have like a romantic relationship with the land. You know, the land is not only part of the building, like rocks are coming into the space, and the way the buildings frame nature and celebrate it, but there are these incredibly powerful spaces that create this hyper connectivity to the landscape. So these things, and funny enough, you know, you spoke about the book Lair. You know, bang. Just honestly, I this was not like a plug, but it's actually like when I actually load up my computer to make it sit higher, and I happen to, because they're all these like nice black books, so I have them like stacked under my computer. But I think like my upbringing was, as I spoke about in the book, the Lair book, is I was always growing up in the suburbs of New Jersey. My father showed me like James Bond films, and I was always inspired with the villain's lair, the hideout. And my first James Bond film was The Man with the Golden Gun, and that was a villain by the name of Scalamandra, and he had this hideout in these rocky cliffs, like islands outside of Phuket or around Phuket, and that was just so amazing to me that someone could like occupy, almost like an animal would occupy like a cave or something, and build this kind of architecture within the landscape. And you know, it was a tremendous amount of that being done. I'm not sure these were like environmental reasons or a love for the planet, but I think because they were out for, you know, global domination, a lot of these villains, and you know, some of them had occupied craters inside of volcanoes in like Japan, and all these things I think put together my experiences and kind of forced me into this direction, which really is underlying this idea of like a tremendous love and affection and emotional connection to the natural world. And I think like one last thing is I studied a lot in university about Japanese garden design and the way that you know, the Japanese relationship to nature and how that the pavilions and the gardens and things like that. So, and I lived in Japan, you know, in the 90s, and visited all these incredible temples and pavilions and gardens, and I think like that was also very much a part of my upbringing.
Speaking of Japanese gardens, I think the Japanese architecture has huge respect for nature. They almost want to do nothing with it and just respect it and leave it as it is.
Yeah.
So which leads me to our next question. You've recently revealed designs for your latest project, Desert Rock in Saudi Arabia, which is gaining a lot of attention and excitement around the world. Could you share with us the journey through this project and how maybe your initial visit to site or your initial impressions and interaction with the land later nurtured your vision and the final design? And also, were you expecting to get such a huge response from the media world? Everyone's very much looking forward.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's sort of a dream come true, to be able to finally execute on our vision that we've had in really reconsidering that relationship of the built and the natural. Like when you go out, when we first go out to like a landscape or a project, I guess we have a very Japanese sensibility, which is like we don't want to do anything, which is not good for business. When someone brings you to the far corners of the world and says, "I want to do a project here," and your first thoughts are, I like it the way it is. So, once we kind of get over that hurdle, we begin to kind of see opportunities, if we look very carefully, on how to kind of hide the architecture. It's kind of a antithetical way of like architectural thinking, I guess, right? Like if you look at 5,000 years of civilization, it was all about sort of architecture being predominant and sort of conquering land, where in this kind of reverse of that philosophy, where we're trying to find the way that architecture could kind of subvert and be submissive to the land, but at the same time creating this incredible heightened connection and awe-inspiring experience to see the natural world, to see the beauty of the place. So finding these opportunities to kind of insert surgically into the land and to make it disappear, takes a tremendous effort, as we spoke, but it's also about sort of like listening to the site, to try to understand how we can make this this kind of fusion between land and architecture most successful. Like we did a house for a very famous movie director, Michael Bay, who did all the Transformers movies and things like that. And when I was walking the site in Los Angeles with Michael, I mean, I was kind of like touching it and feeling the rocks and and really engaging with the land. And like Michael was kind of like laughing about it. He's like, what are you doing? What are you like? I was like, I'm absorbing like all the forces and the energy and the house, while very large, is almost invisible from the street. It's like carved into the land and built into the hillside, but in doing so, it's kind of it's not fighting the land. It's more like a harmonious relationship. So it's looking at these incredibly dramatic landscapes, and it's funny that an invisible architecture, or the attempt to create an invisible architecture, makes such an impact. And I think maybe that is because of this kind of rethinking of how we can really protect the planet, right? I mean, you're seeing it. We lost a bit of that momentum during like a previous administration here in the United States, but we're starting to really get refocused on that, which I think is obviously like so important, that we do take that. And I feel like the global sentimentality of these things is that it's more pressing now than ever, because there's been so much climate catastrophes, right, all around the world, that everyone's like, this is it, we got to do it, and now's the time. We don't have more time. If we don't change our relationship with the planet, like we're in 100 years we're in serious trouble. So I think that just those moments of discomfort are are forcing people to really get behind these new ways of considering what an architecture can be in a natural environment, and while still preserving it and making it even more spiritual and more powerful connection.
Mm-hmm. I think what you said about carving into the land and making the architecture almost invisible, yet being very poetic and very respectful about the context is very interesting. And also, what are some of the uses for the rocks that were carved out of the desert rock being used? What are some of the sustainable strategies incorporated into the design of the
great
project?
Yeah, so you know, all the rock that we're using is being reused as part of the project. So it's sort of like we made a sort of mission to not remove or add anything unnecessarily. So all the sand and the rock and all that becomes part of the aggregate of how we would then make and construct elements that are, let's say, positive in space rather than negative, you know, additive rather than subtractive. So we're keeping like a closed loop. You know, energy wise, you know, we're really, number one, like learning from ancient civilizations, and that, you know, we're avoiding you know, direct exposure to the sun with overhangs and deep recesses. And you know, walking through the desert, it's actually quite nice even in the summer, but you have to find the shade. You have to hide in the crevices, and you know, and we were doing that, and climbing and finding moments where you're protected from the sun in the hottest point. So we're being very, very sensitive to you know, the geomancy of like where to locate things and how to get views but protect from the elements, and you know, and in doing so, like minimizing the energy requirements. I mean, we're capturing and reusing all the water, where working with an incredible landscape design team by the name of Melk, and rehabitating the wadi, which is like the desert floor. And we found pictures from 100 years ago of the wadi floor, where it was an incredible ecosystem, but because of like the way that the land has been mismanaged, with animals grazing on it destroyed the ecosystem. So we're working with Melk to replenish this desert ecosystem, of course preserving water at all times. You know, we're trying to just minimize all intake of materials, working with materials that and artisans that can be found locally. So, you know, in a dream scenario, we would even consider like no connectivity with phones or you know, we just to create a very disconnected, but at the same time hyper connected relationship with the desert, right? Like I always when I give talks, I always start with that idea, right? I mean, it's great that we're all the way across the world and we can communicate and connect, but even though we're so connected as a species, it's allowed us to disconnect from our kind of local environment and our even our friends and families, right? Like it's easier to just call people or text. And I even see my kids, you know, like instead of hanging out, they're like texting each other and stuff. So we're working really hard to make our work help in the connection and help in this kind of recalibration, and using all the materials that we can from the place. You know, we don't want to import stone from Italy. Not that we don't like stone from Italy, but we love stone from Italy, but we like to use stone from Italy when we're working in Italy, stone from, Asia, if we're working in Asia, stone from the area, so we're really trying to create a grounded, a groundedness with the environment, and making it so unique and so special to that place that it really can't be anywhere else. And that's what I think is a tremendous focus of what we like to do.
Sorry, I think it got cut off.
Oh, sorry, did I? I was wondering. No, I was saying this connectedness is the real focus of what we try to do.
Indeed, I believe it's a very inspiring project, and we very much look forward.
I look forward to it too. I've been waiting so many years, and we're very, very excited.
The dream come true.
It is
the final layer. I believe it just broke ground.
Yes. The minimal breaking of
Congratulations.
ground. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're really excited, and we've poured everything we could into making this dream a reality.
And also, I believe that your practice has already displayed such a striking range of projects around the globe, from high-rise buildings to where you're based in Miami, to civil buildings such as the Mutin's water purification plant in Basel, and of course the I Love Golf Academy and Clubhouse in Jordan. They all vary in height, they vary in location, from flat, low-lying lands to the mountains. There's so much variety, yet so different in every way. And I guess my question is, can architecture become iconic without having to constantly pursue after trends, verticality, and the so-called grandeur?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question that we ask ourselves as well. You had mentioned the Isla golf course in Jordan, and our client is a visionary Jordanian woman who's a dear friend, and she came to us and said, like, we need an iconic building. And we were saying to ourselves, like, we want to avoid iconic, whatever, iconic to us in a way means sort of showy in a way, right? Like kind of celebrating the amazingness of the architecture, and doing so in a, let's say, a blatant way. And when we were at the site, we were looking around us and we saw the mountains and all the the different colors of the place, and these like sand dunes that were part land work, like moving the land of what was there, and also kind of the environmentally manipulated by wind and other things. And we basically said to ourselves, like, this is it, the project's here already. We need to like just dig in the sand a bit and create sort of an occupiable dune with a very minimal way. And we think a lot about this idea of we know it as like this idea of like silent monumentality. So rather than iconic, like, we think about ways that our work can be silent and hidden and integrated within the landscape, but at the same time create these monumental and awe-inspiring experiences where you go into these places, and they're not just like, we try to think, and you mentioned it earlier, this idea that form follows feeling. And what we mean by that is it's not just like what you see, it's engaging all the senses. It's creating comfort by having these like deep spaces that are not air conditioned but are thermally pleasant to be in, and creating that sense of underlying comfort. Like, I know it's in a way it's almost like antithetical to the way that architects are trained to think, or what, but like our main objective is to create awe and pleasure and delight and joy and hedonistic understandings of beauty. And for me, that's really what I find in landscape. So to get these types of sensations, one, in our work, we have to sort of build with the land rather than like merely on the land, and with it meaning like integrated with it, but also of the land, right? So in Isla, we took the sand and the rock and everything that was there and turned it into the structure. And I would say, like, you mentioned this effortlessness. It appears effortless, and it was very economical as well, right? So yeah, I mean, one could make expensive buildings do many, many different things, but in this instance, we were building these land sculptures that we inhabit, and building them with labor that had no experience doing this type of work, as well as with no equipment other than a pump for the concrete. So everything in these buildings was built like very low tech and by hand. And the end results, by the techniques that we developed with our incredible engineers in Switzerland, and our team and the director of our office in Basel, Beat Husler, and it was just it was this fusion of trying to figure out how to turn land into architecture and do it in a incredibly economical and low tech way. But no one kind of sees that because it feels very high tech, not high tech, but the shape and the volumes. But I think that's like where the alchemy arrives, is like, how do you do more with less? How do you transform the sort of ordinary into the extraordinary, and doing it in a way that is environmentally conscious, as well as cost effective as well. And I think that's something that really is a big focus of our objectives, is that light touch but high impact.
That's a very good answer. Yeah.
Good.
And I think that during this time and age, we have gone through a pandemic, we have gone through lockdowns, and seeing such architecture can really lift our moods. And so for future generations, what kind of lessons that we can learn from this particular time and age, and how can human beings and nature coexist better, and to basically foster better spaces for future generations?
Well, I think that it's really profound what you said, in that what we were interested in is like, obviously, the lockdown and all the horrible things that came around. But when we were first like months into it, we saw very interesting things happening. We saw nature rebuilding itself. And while we as a species were locked down, like the animal kingdom and the natural world was sort of closing in on our environment. And I saw that as I don't know if you saw, but there were like these interesting videos of like wild animals going through streets in different cities around the world and sort of reclaiming their territory. And I think for future generations, it's not us versus them, right? I mean, we're not going to have like, grizzly bears like walking through cities, or nor do we want to, destroy habitat. But how can we create more habitat? Like when we start a project, we do a drawing and a collage of like all the flora and fauna in an area that has been there naturally, natively, but also things that we may want to bring back, because it aligns us. It's like a moment of alignment and saying like, well, this is our objective. How do we bring this place to a harmony and a paradise, right? And a paradise not just for us, but for the plants, for the bird, like create an entire ecosystem within a project. So like in Desert Rock, we're not just putting some plant, but like we're actually like regenerating the ecosystem. So I think that in future generations and the people who are merging, the children and other people who are kind of emerging into the profession, I think are coming with this heightened sensitivity and this new way of thinking. And I just believe like there is no choice, and if we could do things like this that are spectacular in their experiences, it's a win-win, right? So the Isla example of building with the earth, building low tech, building with local labor, working with local artists who use the minerals from the surrounding hills and integrating them into the building itself, and doing it at a very economical way, like that to me is like a best direction forward. And it's not always applicable. Like you're doing a high rise in Manhattan, it's hard to kind of work in that philosophy, but it is something. We're working on a high rise building design right now, and we're thinking about how, like, the premise of this building is like how can we make this building produce as much energy, use as little materials as possible, and create the most incredible environment. So we put forth these missions in our starting point of a project, and and it's a tower, and we're hoping that it's going to generate more energy than it uses. So that's kind of I think the starting point, and I think things are coming along, and I'm feeling cautiously optimistic, but I think we have no choice but to keep pushing this philosophy of more coexistence forward. And it was great to see in the Venice Biennale some of that thinking of how we can coexist and create a better world, as opposed to like utilizing and manipulating and conquering the resources and the beauty of the place. How can we kind of turn that back and reconsider? And I think we're going to see really interesting things and interesting approaches. And I'm just thinking a bit. I follow Sir David Adjaye, the esteemed architect, and on Instagram, and he shows a lot of incredible habitats of people in the in Africa, and how they built through the millennia without technology, carving into the mud and using mud. And I think these things, this sort of primitive awakening is something that we're going to see hopefully a lot more of. And we hope to continue to inspire with these projects, because at the end of the day, like, if you can create something inspiring, that's what's going to help move the needle in this thought process. And just to do things that are ordinary with this philosophy is probably not going to give the biggest impact. So opportunities like Isla, Desert Rock, the Muttons water treatment facility, all these projects are kind of heightening this dialogue that we have, and the idea of really not creating architecture, but something else, some other kind of hybrid chimera between the built and the natural.
Yeah. How would you advise younger architects to gain that kind of awareness? Because they don't necessarily teach them in architecture schools or architecture training. That's something that you have to go and travel and step out of your comfort zone. Because surely if you're an architect, you are going to build outside your native land and you grew up with. So how would you advise?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think for us, building around the world, I grew up in New Jersey. I finally was able to build a building, not too far from where I spent my entire childhood, and it meant a lot for me. But coming to places with in a way, like a child's sensibility and a child's sense of imagination, and I think like the children have it, right? Like I bring to mind like thoughts of my children like playing in the sand, or on the beaches, and those things are like inspiring to me. Like I don't think we have to pursue complexity in a way. I think we have to pursue this sort of more primordial, the more emotional, the more thinking with the the heart, obviously not a figurative heart, but like rather than the sort of intellectual, right? Because I think like inherently we do have that connection, we do have that love, like and I get like caught up sometimes in thinking like in our country, you have like Democrats who are pro environment, and then you have like Republicans who are like pro business, and and in reality, interestingly enough, like much of the environmental movement many years ago was actually a Republican initiative. And not that Democrats were against it, but you have to ask yourself, like, how, like, does anyone like a polluted river? Does anyone want to see an area that was a beautiful forest depleted? And I think naturally and inherently, like, the answer is no, right? Like, we don't want to see smokestacks. We don't want to see the drive from New Jersey to New York that I spent my whole life driving through. No one likes that. And I think that sort of the innocence and the purity of like the younger generations, I just hope that they're not sort of tainted in that view, but also, as you said, the education process needs to support it. We did a studio at Cornell, the Coexist studio, and it was taking a industrial waste facility and the area around it in Miami and converting it into something else, some new way of thinking about the relationship between you know, man and nature. And I think a lot about these images. I've never visited, but these like ancient villages in China that have been like overgrown with landscape, or if you've had the opportunity to visit Angkor Wat in Cambodia, you know, like the nature has taken over. And I'm always thinking like that's where we want to be, because you know, nature will thrive. We're the ones who are gonna have the problem, because, you know, as soon as we stop doing what we're doing, like nature comes back, right? Like as we saw in the pandemic, where, you know, when the planes stopped flying and the boats stopped doing, like the sea life and the bird, everything was thriving. So and that happened really quick, which was so interesting. I mean, it happened within the span of 6 weeks or something, or 8 weeks, where like you noticed difference. You know, I saw like way more dolphins like playing in the water, and manatees, and there was something really beautiful about it. But, you know, I hope that it's not another pandemic or some other natural disaster that really pushes us. But, you know, unfortunately, I think like we do learn from moments of discomfort, and you know, and all these environmental challenges and climatic issues are going to force the hand. And I think that the educators of today need to, you know, really look at these moments carefully and recalibrate.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today, and we're very honored to have you again.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for your incredible questions, and I hope we can together inspire the future
Yes.
generations, and even the current generations, to
Yes.
to think differently.
Yeah.
So great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in.
Bye.
All right,
Bye-bye.
bye.